Look at that. Yeah, it's a...
That's a fact, yep.
So we got the story from Insider. Birth control pills
That
could
is
add 10
creepy.
million doses of hormones to our wastewater every day.
Frogs.
Some of that estrogen may wind up in our taps.
Yep.
Yeah, this is a story I heard about a while back. Hormones from birth control pills can travel through showers, toilets, and washing machines to local wastewater facilities. In his book, Troubled Water, activist Seth Siegel writes that birth control pills add more than 10 million doses of synthetic estrogen to U.S. wastewater every day. From there, the hormones could get discharged into rivers and lakes that serve as sources of drinking water. Only a tiny portion of the estrogen in wastewater makes its way to U.S. taps, but Siegel still thinks we should remove it. So I think maybe it's a bit exaggerated, as if you're like turning the tap water on and there's going to be birth control in it. It looks like it could be an issue.
We all also, aren't we having a fertility crisis?
We are.
What is that all about?
Like we just aren't having enough kids.
Does it mean that people aren't trying enough, or that it's people
There's a
aren't
lot of trying, and there's a lot of not having children.
Is that because they're late? Too late?
What? There's
Older?
that. There's like being older, and then there's being older is one of the things, but there's also been issues of fertility. Like
There's so
I don't
much
have enough
junk
information.
in the food supply.
Yeah.
High fructose corn syrup, aspartame. We have birth control. You have how many oxycodone? How many of these pharmaceuticals that are legal are getting pissed into the water supply?
It's kind of crazy.
What are your guys' thoughts on birth control?
I have lots of thoughts on birth control. You want to hear them?
Yes.
So I went on birth control when I was 16. My doctor said that I had polycystic ovarian syndrome and that I should go on birth control to regulate my cycle. So I did. I did go on birth control. And then I was on it for a very long time. I was on it until I was 32, 33, something like that. And then I went off it because I wanted to have a child. And I had, for that whole period of time, I thought I was depressed. I thought I was maladjusted. I thought I was awkward. I thought I was socially weird. I thought all of these things about myself, that I was morose, miserable. And then I went off birth control, and it literally felt like a dam broke in my entire body and in my brain also, where it was like suddenly I could see everything in color, and I just felt like an entirely different person. And I suddenly really was more outgoing. I liked being around people more. I wasn't really depressed. I mean, I was still miserable because I'm still me, but I wasn't depressed about everything. It was shocking. It was so shocking that I had to go back on it within a month, and I had to wait a little bit to go off it.
Come on.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, there's
And then it turned out that I didn't have polycystic ovarian syndrome. I
Jesus.
wasn't
Oh
infertile.
my gosh.
There was no reason for me to be on the pill that entire time. And I had suffered from for a while I was on this pill where if I went into the sun, I would pass out.
Wow.
Jesus Christ.
Well,
Right. And I was in LA. I was like, this is not working.
There's two.
I do not recommend birth control.
There's two big issues. One is the feminist view that birth control has empowered women because now they're free to function, without fear of pregnancy, which could potentially hold them back or whatever. But then there's also the fact that our society has mass medicated young women.
That's correct.
And I'm wondering, have we tracked for the psychological impacts of mass medicating young women?
Well, I've gone through, I've done a little study of other, essentially upper middle class girls in my age group. All of us were put on birth control when we were about 16. Every one of us. And I was like, did you have a reason? Well, my doctor said my periods were weird. And the reason that they say stuff, they give you a reason, is so that your insurance covers it.
Right.
So my insurance covered it for the entire time.
The
I wonder if
doctor
it's
just
different.
wanted you on it, or?
Yeah, the doctors want 16-year-old upper middle class girls in the U.S. on birth control so that they don't have teen pregnancies.
Huh. I mean, I guess teen
That's
pregnancy is a bad
basically-
thing, but
that's, yes, it now I sound crazy, but in looking at all of the women I know of that age, it's very this has
So
happened to all of
Birth
us.
control makes it harder to have kids, and they're peeing it into the water supply, and it's harder for people to have kids. Could be. Gung gung. What?
Have you heard of the mice Utopia
yeah.
Experiment?
Talk about it all the time.
yes.
It's just, when they give mice a lovely place to live and enough bedding and enough food and enough everything, and eventually the mice go a bit crazy and turn on each other and stop having sex. And
Oh, that's like America.
Well,
you just wonder if
we do talk about the Utopia experiment quite a bit. I think he did it. The guy did it with mice and rats, like he did one and the other. and a finite amount of space, but unlimited food and water, and then the rat, just see what they do. And they would have what's called behavioral sync, where the rat society would break down and they would start eating each other and killing each other. I was thinking about that because we're effectively running a chicken utopia experiment. And I'm half kidding, but we launched a YouTube show called Chicken City, which is just live streaming the chickens, where they have a large amount of space, unlimited food and water, and we have no intention of like harvesting the chickens. I'm wondering if we'll see something break down, or if chickens will just not be like they're different, different species. I wonder if it's different from mammals, the birds.
Do they have a limited space?
They do, yeah. It's big though. It's a
pretty
big
big.
space.
Right.
But the rats and the mice had limited space, but it was a decent amount. What was interesting is that in those experiments, they would all cluster in one bunch in one area and not utilize the full space they were given. So
I just wonder if we lack purpose. I just look at, if my kids ever talk about millionaires, sort of Kardashian style millionaires, and I'm like, yeah, but
are they
what
billionaires? They're billionaires, right?
Well, billionaires, millionaires, billionaires, just a lot more than me. But I'd sort of look at them and I think, what's the purpose of their day? Like, what are they striving for? And do we as human beings need something to strive for? Because if you've got nothing to aim for, to go for, to move forward for, then don't you just stay still and then just become unhappy?
Yes. So I had a friend who became a millionaire when he was like 16. And he said that he had an existential crisis because all of a sudden, it's not just the fact that he was rich and could buy anything he wanted. It was that all of a sudden he was like the lord of everyone. Right. The way people treated him. He no longer had like teachers who would tell him he was wrong. All of a sudden it was like, hey, let me get that for you. Oh, you're so smart. Wow, look what you've done. And he said that, it happens to all of these guys in tech who become millionaires rather quickly because they like write a code, write a program, and then overnight it sells, and then now they're worth $3 million, and they're sitting at this massive bank account thinking, what do I do now? Like, you wrote the code, you wrote the program, you solved the problem, and now you're rich. But they never did this work because they were trying to get money. They were trying to accomplish something, and they become listless, depressed. They sleep all day. He told me that eventually most of them, they'll go like 6 months to a year, and then finally normalize, and then their happiness stabilizes, and they try and find their next mission or whatever. But I think that hearing that story, and then think about the fact that I think most people in the United States today are living like kings, may be why we're dealing with this collapse, this behavioral sink. I definitely think the U.S. is dealing with behavioral sink, like much like the rat utopia. I think I've seen it with like Occupy Wall Street. All of these people protesting, this is, now almost 11 years ago or 10 years ago. When I was in Brazil, and many who listen to this show probably heard me tell the story, but forgive me because I haven't told it to Kelly. When I went to Brazil, I was in the favelas, and I met, the favelas are shanty towns. They fall apart in the rain. And one of the woman asked me in Portuguese a question, and it was translated, why are the rich people protesting in the United States? And I said...
That's a very good question.
But I said... I don't understand. They're not. And then she asked, and he was like, oh, she's asking about like Occupy Wall Street. And I was like, oh, those were like college kids with debt, people living in cities. And she laughed. She was like, Americans are all rich. Her question was like, I think it was probably like mistranslated. She wasn't saying why are specifically the American rich people protesting. She was saying something like, why would Americans who are rich protest about this stuff? And it's really interesting because I'm like, hey, you're preaching to the choir, man. I'm like, if you got air conditioning and a refrigerator, you're living better than Rockefeller did 100 years ago. So we're all basically taken care of. What do we do with our lives? Create problems, complain about stuff?
I sometimes think you get to the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and then it inverts.
Yeah.
And then we're just heading for... just doomed.
So Kim Kardashian came under a lot of fire that I didn't think she deserved because recently she said something along the lines of, you need to work hard. And everyone's like, oh, you're rich. You don't know what it's like. But she keeps herself busy. Didn't she go to law school? Like, she didn't just like...
She didn't go to law school, but she has been reading law.
Right,
doing this other different way to get a law degree.
She has a company, right? And she's doing all this different stuff. I completely agree. Like, you should be staying busy no matter how much money you make. And especially if you get richer.
It's like The Matrix, In the first Matrix, Agent Smith tells Morpheus, he's like, the first world we designed was perfect, but the human mind rejected it because it craves conflict and struggle. It's like, without it, people become almost deranged.
Well, also we have a lack of. So I'm what you call a gold star atheist. I've never believed in God, but I think the organized religion and the mutual purpose of people and collective purpose of heading towards an afterlife, of actually trying to do good for something that you can never touch. I think that also has left us wanting, and I think where we've looked is within our narcissistic little bodies.
Yeah, I
Isn't
think
it
that's right. We have turned in and we worship the self where we used to worship God. And now we do worship the self. And we have removed the soul. We've extricated the soul and replaced it with gender.
So beautiful.
I do think it's interesting that the culture war has made a lot of people like theist or whatever.
I've got a theology degree, so I have a vested interest in.
You're an atheist with a
promoting.
theology degree?
Yeah.
I mean,
I love this.
That sounds right.
I want to
Does that
hear
make you
everything more
a
about this.
theologist? Yeah, tell me about it.
A theologist.
That's wonderful.
No, I think that makes sense if you're going to be an atheist to know what you're talking about.
Well, I thought I'd find some. So for a start, I thought university, because I'm an idiot, was going to be like Kids from Fame, which is probably way too old a reference for any of you.
I liked it. I liked the show.
So you'd just sit in an individual chair and you'd all sort of discuss these really meaty topics. It wasn't quite like that, but I just thought there may be universal truths. And if I study theology, I may find universal truths, and then I may examine my own belief system, but that didn't actually happen. However, I do think the universal truth of human beings absolutely needing something above and beyond themselves is something that now we're finding out to our peril.
Yeah.
Do you think above and beyond, like a partner?
I think anything that makes you put yourself a little bit last. Whether that be family, community. Whilst we've lost our organized religions, in the UK probably more than in the US, and it's no mistake that in poor countries they still are very religious. So whilst we've lost our religions, we've also lost our sort of touch your parents because they're just next door kind of culture. We don't have communities. We've all moved away from each other. Many people live tens of miles, if not hundreds or thousands of miles away from their parents. And I just think these real things that you can reach out and touch are things that we desperately need.
Doesn't it feel almost like it's intentional? I mean, think about it. The idea that you turn 18, move away from your parents, separate from your family, go off to college. You go to college, what happens? You get a bunch of strangers indoctrinating you in these institutionalized learning facilities. It just seems like a lot of things that have happened over the past 60, 70 years have effectively orchestrated the downfall of the family and our society. I'm not saying it is intentional.
That's really interesting.
I'm saying it's just like you've got people who heavily advocate for separating yourself from your community, from your family. I just think that's interesting.
When I was looking at college and stuff, my mom wanted me to go to college very far away. We lived in Philadelphia. I had only lived with my mom for 2 years. I didn't know her that well. I didn't really grow up with her. And she was like, you should go to California. You should go somewhere far away for college. And I was like, I'll go to New York. Like, I'll go, but I'm not, how far do you really want me to go? Like, I barely know you. I don't have a home anywhere. I was totally rootless. And so I landed in New York, and it's still a situation where I feel like I have no roots anywhere. I feel like I have when I look around, you guys know I've had this struggle of should I stay, should I go in New York? And it's like, I don't know where I'd go. If there was a place where I could go home, if it was like, I could just go back home, I would do that. But I don't have any place that is the home that I know other than New York City. It's weird.
I had that growing up. We would go, my dad's mom, my grandma, we lived 8 blocks away. So we would go there every 4 days a week, 3 days a week, 2 days a week, whatever.
That's awesome.
And then I moved in college. I left the state, and now I haven't seen my parents. I see them once every 2 years or something. It doesn't feel right. I was just talking to my mom yesterday about that. It's only a 6-hour drive, but it doesn't have that feeling of we're going to pop over to my grandma's house on the weekend.
Thanks for checking out this segment from the Timcast IRL podcast. But if you want to check out the full show live, tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. And if you want more special access content, head over to timcast.com and become a member. Your membership helps sustain this company, keep our journalists employed, makes this show happen, and you will get access to exclusive members-only segments of the Timcast IRL podcast, and there's a massive library to check out. So again, go to timcast.com or tune in Monday through Friday at 8 p.m., and we'll see you all there.